forum for our customers. It's hosted by our customer success team, and that's really a space that our customers can join and learn about best practices, get a little bit of a product update on maybe the recent releases, and really a space that they can come and learn and just dig into the product on a reoccurring monthly basis.
Nice. Thank you for that. Um, and we'll continue on with the process with this presentation. And I'd love to get the audience here to participate and tell us how they themselves are creating engaging webinar experiences for their audience. All right, we're about to launch another poll. Um, and the poll, again, is going to focus around how often you might be running webinars. All right, are you currently hosting them weekly, monthly, quarterly, or even maybe you don't have a set schedule? Let us know. We are curious to learn more about how you all are doing it. Quarterly. Okay. And also, as you're answering the poll, if you can drop some insights in the chat about what you feel is the most valuable for you, that'll be interesting to see as well. If you're hosting them quarterly, monthly, or weekly, be curious to learn more about what the results have been from weekly webinars and what kind of webinars those have been that you are hosting on a weekly basis. Looks like there's a wide variety of timing that folks are hosting webinars. It's not set to one specific timeline, which is good to see. But it looks like folks are hosting them at all different times throughout the year. So this is great to see. All right, thank you. And now that we've talked through now that we've talked through creating engaging webinar experiences for your audience, let's talk through how you can use Wistia Live to capture leads and then use the Wistia Live analytics to further engage your audience. All right, hosting an event in Wistia not only lets you capture leads, but it also integrates with your favorite marketing automation tool. So once you've paired Wistia Live with your respective marketing platform, you can pass your registration data over from Wistia to that tool to nurture your registrants and attendees. And as you collect the registration information that you have coming in, you can use Wistia's robust analytics to better understand where registrants are coming from and get insights on what promotional channel is driving the most registration. And of course, once the webinar is over, you want to get insights on how your audience engaged with the content. Wistia's analytics offer you insights on who attended, how many of those who attended were engaged in the chat, how many Q&A questions were submitted, and really get detailed on how focused your audience was throughout the entire presentation, which allows you to get a deeper understanding of your overall audience engagement. So now let's bring our panelists back on stage. And this question is for Grace. And the question is, how are you using Wistia Live today to capture leads for your webinars? And can you walk us through what that strategy looked like today?
Yeah, so we run a small, effective team. So when we are building webinars, the kind of pre-event process is very, very much multi-channel, especially because our audiences tend to be a little bit scattered all over the place because we are talking to a wider group of ICP. We just kind of need to be on every single channel. So in terms of capturing new leads, we run several different campaigns right before webinars. So of course, we're going to email our database that we already have. The people that are already interested in our content will also have in-app notifications and everything with people that are already engaged with us. But a really large part of it as well, actually, is our social media campaigns. We also do PPC campaigns, and we also are investigating paying for newsletters. So in the past, we've put ads on newsletters that are sending to like a niche group of marketers or whatever your audience is. And we find that when you're speaking to an audience that already trusts the source of where the content is getting from, you're just going to get higher conversion rates. So I'm talking about like smaller newsletters with a more specific topic focus, associations or groups that kind of have the people you're wanting to talk to, and that sort of thing. And then with social media as well, because we've spent a lot of time building up a brand reputation and awareness of like, hey, Lumen 5 is going to give you good quality educational content. And we call it sort of like a lot of giving before you cash in that trust with an ask. So I think Rand Fishkin calls it zero-click marketing, where you're giving content and putting that out into the world without an expectation that you're necessarily going to get a click. And so I would say a lot of our webinar process when it comes to capturing new leads is making sure that we're putting in all of that work beforehand so that our name is out there and our brand is out there, so that when we are asking them like, hey, fill out this form to access this webinar, they have that established trust and we have that authority for them to understand this is going to be really good content. So we're getting those leads in, and then they enter in the rest of our kind of marketing nurture process where they get the rest of our emails over the next however many months until we can nurture them to conversion stage.
Oh, nice. And with that, do you currently integrate Wistia Live with any of your marketing automation tool for that engagement to happen pre and post event?
Yeah, we actually integrate with HubSpot. So we've used a lot of different tools in the past. So like at my previous position, I actually used GoToWebinar and Salesforce. And I think it really depends on the size of your team and what you're looking to get out of these events. For my team now, we really like Wistia because it kind of sits very perfectly between being a very intuitive interface. I feel like audience, if you've never been on a Wistia webinar before, you might sort of be able to tell like, oh yeah, there's 4 tabs here. I'm going to go to these tabs to do these things. I think there are other platforms out there where it's a little bit more confusing and less intuitive. And then even on the back end, because the integration is really, really straightforward, you just kind of set it up sort of like, hey, here's the list that we want to send over the data with. That means that our HubSpot is able to receive all that data after the event. We know like, hey, who watched, who registered, and what do the engagement levels look like? And that also gives us a really good gauge of, in casual terms, how good the webinar was. Like, did people actually sign up? Did people actually engage? Did they leave after a little bit? So I know this is sort of a roundabout question, but I think overall, the way that we capture leads needs to be very much integrated with the rest of our strategy. And Wistia really helps us do that because we can connect it right to HubSpot.
Nice. This is great. Carrie and Rendell, anything you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I was also going to say we also use HubSpot and Salesforce together. So because we were already integrating with Wistia into HubSpot and Salesforce, integrating Wistia Live just was seamless, right? When we started using Wistia Live, it just was already there. The data flow of registration, attendees, watches, all that good stuff was already flowing back and forth. And more recently, we started using Slack as well. So we're able to kind of let, on the client success side, we're able to let the customer success team know, hey, so-and-so registered for the office hours, or hey, so-and-so is now on the office hours right now. And it's been really helpful to just give real-time updates and all that kind of stuff. So it's just very seamlessly integrated with our tech stack that we already have existing.
The Slack integration, I think, is very powerful. It's actually one that I've begun to see a lot more organizations integrate as part of the entire strategy, because it makes it a lot easier and faster for their team to engage with the customer or audience member that is engaging with the content, right? You don't really have to go inside the platform to see who did what. You're getting the alert directly into Slack. So I find that to be very useful. And I'd love to see more organizations incorporate that as part of their overall strategy. Rendell, did you want to add anything? Is your team currently integrating Wistia Live with any marketing automation tool? I know your use case is a little bit more unique and different from a traditional webinar setup.
Yeah, it's really, I would say it's proportional to the size of the organization we're working with, because we operate more as a creative services company, like internal creative services team for each of these organizations. So in terms of driving leads, registration, on our end, that turns into basically we're producing a promotional spot or content, which maybe we're using the Wistia player and can help drive numbers that way and awareness. So if anything, maybe it's part of a brand awareness play but usually the organizations we work with, they either have their own platforms or maybe some of them don't know and probably could use a tool like Wistia to help them out.
Thank you. And going back to the metric question, and this is a quick answer. You don't have to go into greater details on it, but I'd be curious to learn, when you're looking at the webinar performance, what are some of the metrics that is the most important to you in terms of the webinar performance? And since you're pinned here on my screen, Randall, let's start with you, and then we'll go and we'll go and ask Grace and Carrie.
I'm sorry, could you mind repeating that for me?
What sort of webinar performance, what metric is the most important to you when it comes to webinar performance?
Well, right now, the main thing is engagement. Let's say oftentimes we'll produce content that may have, it'll run the gamut. If it's educational session, it could run as long as 45 minutes. If it's a promotional spot, it could be 30 seconds to a minute. So what you're looking at there and what we're looking to do is be able to hold the audience's attention to be able to show our client that our efforts are bearing some fruit. Now, and again, that could change depending on the content development side. How much of it are we responsible for the messaging versus how much is the client in tune to the message that they want to deliver?
Perfect. Anything you'd like to add there, Carrie?
Yeah, so if I think about our monthly customer office hours, so that customer enablement piece, we're really looking at account engagement. So how many of our accounts are we reaching with this series? So holistically over the year, let's say over the quarter, and then contact registration and contact attendee. So is this a good channel for the message? Are we just kind of those basic things, right? So, and we look at the individual month, but we also measure that over time, right? Whereas some people, it just works with their schedule. They remember, right? They have a question, they come. But other times it might be 2 months before we see them return. So.
Nice. Thank you. And yourself, Grace?
I'll echo Randall a little bit here and say that our engagement metrics are the most interesting to us in terms of measuring success. We, of course, also look at number of registrations. And then in certain cases where we're also talking about product releases, it's also important to us to take a look at whether or not our contacts that sales and our CX teams have been engaged with are actually registering and attending the the webinar. Because we do kind of run a joint educational focus, but featuring product type webinars, we'll actually create links that are tracked for our teams to use. And then after the webinar, for example, we'll take a look and be like, okay, how many people that sales is currently talking to actually signed up? And that'll kind of give us an indication or a measuring stick of, is our content actually relevant to the people that are already at that part of the funnel? Is this the sort of content that is going to help them make that purchasing decision, or give our sales team the ammo that they need to have those necessary conversations to come to ideally a closed one conversation. We also repurpose quite a lot, and part of our success metrics is also going to be, hey, if we cut out this portion of the webinar and we put it out onto the internet, whether that's YouTube, LinkedIn, or even sometimes TikTok and Instagram, is that something that's resonating with our audiences? And if it's not, why? Was this too product focused? Was this not educational enough? Or are we just not quite hitting the mark in terms of the educational content and particularly awareness content that our audience is looking for?
I love it. It sounds like the metrics are really based on the type of webinar that you're hosting and the audience that you're looking to drive to that particular webinar event. And there's a lot of different metrics you can measure, whether it be views for the post-webinar recording, engagement for the entire webinar itself. All of that is important, but it really matters based on what use cases you're using the webinar tool for.
Yeah, exactly. I would say that we run webinars about once a quarter. So it really depends as well how our overall metrics are doing. If we're seeing, hey, there's the most recent webinar that we did in early June we ran because like, hey, we really want to help support MQLs in summertime when we know things are a bit slow. We know that product has released a lot of really cool features in the last little while. So it's sort of making that decision before you get to the sort of webinar creation stage of scoping out what the exact metrics are going to be based on what you want the webinar to do. Because a product focused webinar is going to look so different than the kind of AI focused educational webinar we did at the beginning of the year, where it was very much, hey, it doesn't necessarily matter if we get MQLs off of this, if people ask for a demo off of this, because we know it's educational focused. We really just want to get our brand out there as kind of a trusted authority on AI software, as opposed to pushing them towards a demo request.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is all great, and it actually leads me right into my next section, which is one of the greatest things about Wistia Live being part of Wistia is that it's the all-in-one experience that exists, right? Wistia's full marketing automation platform makes it easy for you to not only record a webinar, but get the recording afterwards to then make the changes and updates that you need to then repurpose that recording and share across all the different multiple channels that all of you here have mentioned. So, right, it works both hand in hand to ensure that the pre and post webinar experience is seamless from start to finish. You no longer have to worry about downloading the recording or working with an editor to edit your webinars itself. Because sometimes you might even go and get extra help outside of your organization to just be able to get the recording finalized to then be able to share on the landing page or send out to your audience, whether they attended or not. And now it all happens in one place. Wistia makes it possible for you to trim down the beginning and end of all of your webinar recordings so that way you can create various clips, like Grace mentioned, to share those clips on social, whether it be LinkedIn, YouTube, TikTok, or even create multiple clips that you can then share on a blog and use in other aspects of your content strategy. And we make it happen directly in one place very seamlessly. So now, excuse me, let's bring the panelists back on stage a little bit. Grace alluded to this quite a few times in her response to the earlier questions, but I'd love to hear from Carrie here about the post-webinar process, right? What does that post-webinar process look like for you at Wistia?
Yeah, so we do share the recordings of the live events, and that's kind of marketed on the front end of it, right? So if somebody can't join, they know that they can expect to see that same recording at that same link post event. We also, like you mentioned, we repurpose our webinar content. So through other channels like our newsletter, our community site, so our home that our customers spend a lot of time on, our website, through social, all those normal channels. We just take that content and kind of move it around, right? So when we're talking about a reoccurring webinar that our audience really is expecting to see, we want to make sure they know where to go back and see a different recording if they weren't able to attend live.
Absolutely. It's allowing you to create that evergreen content and capturing them wherever they may be, whether they attended live or they're just capturing the recording later on in a blog. Randall, I know your use case is, again, a little bit more unique because you're acting as a creative service person for other clients. Walk us through that post-webinar process and what have you been able to do with Wistia Live?
I was hoping I wasn't going to get burnt by the mute button, but here we are. So what I was going to say is I brought up IVEX earlier, the premier conference for emergency and critical care veterinarians. That actually, from soup to nuts, Wistia plays a big role. And I'll get to the post side real quick. But I want to start with the pre side because it's kind of important. So we wound up embedding the Wistia player within Map Your Show, which is a platform the conference uses so that they can see information on each session that is happening. And it's done at very, very specific times. So we have a workflow where we have 4 editors, video editors, if you will, in each of these different conference rooms. and we're using Wirecast to stream to Wistia to then push Wistia to Map Your Show. So what will oftentimes happen is we use Wirecast because we have some production elements that we use to roll in to bring up the production quality. Well, at the end of the actual sessions, oftentimes it's a little bit dirty, the front and back end, and we want to clean it up so that we have just the graphic open, let's say, and a graphic close, and not anything that happened beforehand, like the countdown that we had here. So we get rid of the countdown, that's pre-event, and then at the end, we want it to end with just the branding. So that's where the clip, the clipping the edits at the end happens really, really quick. And the turnaround time to have those on-demand sessions for those that couldn't make it has been extremely helpful, because that used to be part of the post-production process where we'd have to take the live recording and do everything within Premiere, export it, re-upload it. So it's really streamlined our workflow quite a bit, and quite happy about it. The bonus now is the translations and the captioning. That's one thing that's been asked about for this upcoming year. So I'm going to be interested to see how we integrate that as part of our post workflow.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that. How about yourself, Grace?
I think very similar to Carrie, post-webinar, we always start with the recording email. We'll send it to attendees as well as registrants. And then afterward, because what we find is that short form content works a lot better as opposed to long form content. So webinars for us in the kind of post-event process are really, really important because we chop it up and put it everywhere. We have a blog, we have highlight videos that will crop from the full recording. We'll put it into emails, put it into social. Yeah, we use webinars for a really long time after they're over. I think especially because we run such a small team and the amount of effort that goes into a webinar is so huge, being able to utilize it beyond the length of time of just a live event has been really, really important to us. So in some ways, I think where we like front load a lot of the work into producing a webinar, being able to use the recording afterward and disseminate it all across our different channels is equally as important for us.
Yeah, especially if you're hosting them quarterly, right? You're not hosting them as often as, let's say, somebody else might be hosting webinars. So being able to get extra use out of the recording across multiple different content strategy, I think is very important, because then you can actually get more insights on how others may be engaging with different parts of the webinar itself that you hosted. Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to add, like in webinars where we do a little bit of everything, like if we have educational content as well as product content, being able to chop it up also allows us to use it in like two different parts of our funnel. So I think in that way, the question that you asked before is why webinars for us is such an important part at every single step.
Yeah. And we'll get to Q&A in just a little bit, but just a quick response for each of you. And this is, I hope, will be a very fun question, is how much time are you currently saving with your post-webinar process now that you're doing it inside of Wistia? Anyone can go first.
I'll go first. So before Wistia, we manually uploaded spreadsheets into Salesforce. So it would take about 1.5 to 2 business days. And now it took us 2 hours at the last webinar. So I don't like that's a lot of time.
Wow. It's saving you a lot of time.
Similar. There's no scrubbing lead lists, right? That even just the time to respond to people, right? The time to get that list into marketing, right, is shorter because it's connected, it's integrated into your CRM. The other thing I was going to touch on is the operational process, right? Is just we've used most of the mainstream webinar products, I'd say, to date. almost all of them integrate with HubSpot in some form or fashion, but the operational setup is a little bit different with each one, right? Calling on each webinar that you're doing, making sure it's synced and mapped, and creating your workflows and your automations to make sure your marketing people registered or attended, all of that stuff. So the time savings and the operational side has been pretty great for us.
Nice.
Yeah, on our end, I'd say, again, I'll use IVEX as an example. It's maybe a couple of hours, let's say per room, if we had 4 individual video editors per room. Typically, it's done towards the end of the day as well. So that's saving, a total of 8 man hours in a day. Not only that, the content is up quicker for the client, right? Versus having to wait end a day and there being this gap of like 8 hours before virtual attendees could access the content. It's up nearly immediately. So it's been very helpful.
Nice. Well, thank you all to the panelists for my questions that you all were gracefully able to answer throughout this presentation today. And we're about to jump into the Q&A to answer some of our audience questions. But before we do, one of the things that is important with hosting a webinar is having a really nice setup for your audience, so that way you can appear to be very presentable, if you will, in some cases to the audience, so they can really engage with the content. And with that, I'd like to take a moment to highlight our new series called Fix My Setup, where we're going to people's homes and offices to help spruce up their setup. Maybe they need some extra lights, maybe they need a professional microphone, or just a microphone that can allow for the audience to hear them more clearly. And I want to share a video because we're actually doing a casting call, if you will, for those of you who might want to get your office set up, revamped and spruced up. We're making a call out to you to submit yourself for your colleagues and have your office fixed up with Fix My Setup. So here's a look at the trailer. So stay tuned.
Who hosts webinars that look like this? Here's your chance to nominate them for a webinar-worthy webcam makeover on where we take at-home webcam setups from blah to hurrah.
I am blown away.
So your webinar star can go live with confidence. We'll hook them up with proper gear to fix their webcam, fix their lighting, fix their audio, even zhuzh up the background.
Hello?
So hit the link and tell us why your friend or colleague has a setup that needs fixing. Who knows, they could get an upgrade that makes their next webinar shine. So nominate today.
And that was Fix My Setup. We are dropping a link here in the chat. We've also added the link to the stage. So if you're interested, or you know someone who you'd love to have their setup be spruced up and revamped, go ahead, visit this page, submit your information, and you might be a lucky winner to get your space revamped. All right, so now let's jump back to Q&A. We're turning it over to you. So I know a lot of you have been asking a lot of questions throughout. We have Sam joining us back on stage here to help moderate the question. So Sam, what have we been seeing in terms of questions that have come in?
We got a lot of great questions that have come in, Gene. We got questions on product, use cases, how we're using it, different sort of details there. The first one I want to go after is just a question that was directly for Carrie. So I'm just going to add it to the stage here. We'd love to hear from Carrie what engagement looks like for the customer success side, specifically for those office hours use case. I think it's just such a cool use case, but just curious to get a little bit more information about what that engagement looks like.
Yeah, so we, if you've ever joined other office hours with different products that you've used, they're all a little bit different, right? Some months you get a lot of questions from the customer base, other months you get little questions. So our customer success team always comes armed with some things that they talk about on their own, right? The different product releases, tips and tricks, things that they've been hearing throughout the month, right? So the goal is to really help them save time, right? So build community, help the customer success team save time. So we look at we have a dashboard in Salesforce, and that dashboard looks at how many accounts have the office hours reached in a certain time period, and then on an individual contact level, we're looking at registrations, attendees by each event, and then also the size of our accounts. So we break our accounts into a couple different levels, and the customer success team is able to see, okay, these are where we're where we're seeing the most engagement coming from our customers.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's super helpful. This is sort of just a general question for the group that I wanted to throw out there. This one is from Troy. What are people's impressions of the interface for the viewer? Like compared to other tools you've used, is it clean and professional? Do you feel like you're able to get the level of customization you have there? So question for anybody, but I don't know if Grace, maybe you want to jump in on this one. Or...
I like it. Whenever we run webinars, we have a member of our team who's watching our dry runs from the audience perspective. So we've taken a lot of screenshots. We've looked at all of the different things that, like, when we change something on the host or panelist side, what does it look like for the audience? We really like it. I think it's very clean and intuitive. I know some other softwares tend to be a little bit more busy, and there's so many panels that you have to open. And in a lot of ways, the way that the Wistia UI is, it's very straightforward. Like, here's your stage, and here's a couple tools, and here's your chat. So we really appreciate that it kind of hits that balance between, here are like all the tools that you need, but we're going to keep it as simple as possible. So if your audience is less tech savvy, for example, they're not going to get confused.
Yeah, that's great. What about you, Carrie?
Yeah, same. Feedback has been wonderful. People love it. I think Grace mentioned it a little bit earlier too. But like she said, the user experience, and people know what they're going to get, right? Just kind of the 4 options that they're going to see when they come into the event. It's very easy. The chat is similar to other chat tools, right? Slack, those kind of things that we know. And it's straightforward, right? And it's easy to use. So you're not confused. You're not downloading a client. You're not, how do I open up this client? The feedback's been amazing.
Oh, that's great. This next question, this is, I feel like, something everybody who does webinars regularly has run into. So I'm just going to add this one up to the stage here so everybody could see. Would love to hear about webinar recruitment strategies. We currently have a webinar series that has garnered a significant attention in our customer base, but the number of attendees has flatlined a little. Thoughts on getting new folks on the call? So yeah, just any kind of thing you could do to reinvigorate a recurring series. Does anybody want to jump in on this one?
I can add in. Because we do offer some recurring webinars, and it ebbs and flows, right? There is some flat lines that come in, and oftentimes when we see that, I think just it depends on how you're driving people to the event, right? So maybe switching that up a bit, testing LinkedIn in-mails, different strategies to how you're driving people in. What's, trying to uncover what that reason is that it's flatlined. Is it just become stale? They expect it, they're not getting value. And then if it's through email, can you add a teaser, some appealing messaging in there that helps position it and give them an idea of what they would expect or why it's going to be different this time around? That's helped us in the past to really just refresh it a bit, right? And just give people a different impression and why they shouldn't miss out, or why they shouldn't just give up on it. Change the time.
Yeah, that's awesome. Grace, did you have something you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I think very similar to Carrie, and it kind of depends on what we mean by webinar series, because the 2 use cases I can sort of think of would be like, hey, this is a series where every time there's a different speaker. And I think in that case, it's potentially a question around, it's a series, but by focusing on the differences of each particular installment in that series could help with the recruitment. But the other use case I'm thinking of would be the same webinar every time, where it's like maybe more customer or product focus. And in that case, I think like all of Carrie's tips, absolutely what I would do. Are there any ways you can change up the channels that you're reaching out to these people to? If it's for onboarding, is there a way you can include that in one of the like first communications that they get, so that they understand this is like the main place where you're going to be able to get that information and kind of speak live to someone who's coming from your side. And I do believe that sometimes putting a little money behind it in the right place at the right time, so very, very targeted PPC, can be effective too.
Yeah,
I could add a little bit here.
Yeah, go right ahead, Randall.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and from my standpoint, again, production, you want to take a look at the content. Are you sure you're hitting the targets and have something worthwhile to be able to share? Make it interactive, right? So that you get audience participation. And then never forget about your setup, because people drop off if things don't look the way they should. And if that's the case, you might want to register for Fix My Setup.
That's great. Thank you, Randall. Awesome. I know we're coming up to the end, but I did see 2 product questions here. Brought Jean back up that I just want to answer very quickly. So one of the ones that came up, this has a pretty common question. Is there any way to get the participants in the chat to be anonymous? Jean, I'll leave that one to you.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's actually a feedback that we've gotten from other customers as well. Right now, there isn't a way to make the chat responses anonymous. But again, we've heard it, and I'm happy to make some noise internally with our team and see if we can get this added to the roadmap in the near future. But right now, there isn't a way to have your chats be anonymous.
And this is another product one from Wendy. Can you change host or add a co-host mid-stream? Like while we are live streaming, can we just add in host?
So in Wistia Live, you can have as many hosts as you'd like. My pro tip would be, if you plan on having multiple hosts throughout the entirety of your event, is to have the other individual or individuals join in as co-hosts during the event. So that way one person can drop off and the other person can take over without jeopardizing the event itself. I would not start with one host and then drop and have the other person join, because you can run the risk of the event itself going down. Reason why having multiple hosts is important is because if one person runs into any issues with the internet, or one person have to drop for any reason, you're not losing the stream mid-event, and you don't want to create that experience for your audience. So the pro tip would be to have more than one person join the event ahead of time, and that allows space for anyone to drop in between and still allow for the event to go through. Like for instance, Sam and I are both co-hosts right now. If Sam were to drop or I was to drop, the event would go on as scheduled and there wouldn't be any interruption.
Awesome. Thank you, Jean, for answering those 2 quick. And I know we're just coming up on time, but I like this last question. I would love an article that lists best practice information for webinar setup, which mics, lights, backgrounds, things are the best. This is just something I would definitely plug the Wistia blog. We have tons of great content on production setups. We have great content on making something like that's how to do a quick setup like this. Like I'm currently in a closet that turned into a nice little studio space. So we have a lot of good information on the blog that you can check out there. And I know at this point we are at time. So yeah, I'll try and go through any other additional questions and follow up with people.
Yeah, absolutely. And one last thing that I'll add to that question is we just published a blog post dedicated to your webinar checklist, which I'm dropping here in the chat. So if you are interested and curious about what that checklist should look like for you as a webinar host or a marketer, whether you're just getting started with webinars or you're leveling up your webinar strategy, this blog post should help you get more insights on how to set up that process within your own organization. Well, we are at time. It is 2:00. Thank you all for joining. Please help me in giving our presenters and panelists a round of applause because they did such a wonderful job answering our questions. And we love hearing about their experience with using Wistia Live. And they dropped their LinkedIn information in the chat as well. So if you're interested in asking them any more questions about their experience, or you're interested in connecting with them offline, please feel free to connect with them on LinkedIn. And if you have any other questions for us, please don't be afraid to reach out to us, support@wistia.com, and we'll be more than happy to answer your questions. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Grace. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Randall, for taking the time. And I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon. See ya.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.